out of the darkness. Farmers used to think that it was the nature of the chickens to peck at one another, that they were basically loners, unsocial animals that couldn't mingle without being nasty. On some farms, their beaks were clipped, but this only made it more difficult for the chickens to eat, which made them hungrier, so they pecked at themselves and one another even more. Then the chicken farmer somewhere noticed something exquisitely simple that changed everything. The chicken coops were dark. The absence of light was what was causing the chickens to peck at each other. As soon as the farmer introduced a light source into his coop, the chickens stopped pecking. It was as simple as that. People are not all that different. When we don't know what our minds need to think well together, we are like chickens pecking around in the dark. This isn't as far afield as it might seem. When we are communicating and thinking well together, our faces actually light up. When our minds don't get enough light, our thinking breaks down and we begin to peck at each other. We begin to peck at ourselves and one another. Humans can no longer afford to think in divisions and in darkness. Collaborative intelligence and creativity is the light that is necessary for our individual and collective survival. We have no choice now but to think together, and work together, and create together. This is the Infinite Imaginarium.
Good morning, Rug. Good morning, Washrobe. Good morning, TV. Good morning, Sink. Morning, Toilet. Good morning, everyone.
And it's this notion of the shadow that Carl Jung talks about. And I think this is very central. Before you get to harness that light within you, you recognize the shadow. And there's this, so I was watching Doctor Strange last night. There's a quote or a line in the movie that really echoed within my consciousness. The Ancient One tells one of the students, you never lose your demons. You only learn to live above them. And there's this notion, being totally aware of yourself and to recognize, and I think a lot of, and this goes into the Jungian concept, a lot of what we, quote unquote, can't handle with society or with other people that really bugs us, or with a loved one, is really a mirror of what we can accept about ourselves. And I know for myself, this is something, and I think for everybody, it's like an ongoing process, right? You know, when I get frustrated with whoever, I notice, like, why am I getting so upset? What is it that's bugging me? And it almost all the time, it has to do with my shortcomings, or with my not being fully aware of my own behavior or my own actions. Or there's another great concept that Jean-Paul Sartre had and called bad faith. And what bad faith is the image that you have within your mind of yourself doesn't match with the actual person you are in your behavior. And that this creates bad faith, and this creates this struggle within you. This is where I kind of wanted to start the show, because the last show we talked about the media. I like what Missy Nomer said about how media is destructive. And I also like what the concept that Douglas Rushkoff kind of poses, is that media as a reflection of our collective self, and is trying to shine some light into us, our collective unconscious. And that if we learn how to deal with that, first individually and then as the collective, that we could start to turn the tide of this environment that we're in, the culture that we're in. I think, and you know, maybe some people don't feel this way, but I think whether knowingly or unknowingly, a lot of people, maybe they won't phrase it the way I phrase it, but have this intuitive feeling and yearning. I just kind of came from this webinar with Science and Non-Duality, talking about the deepest knowing of your being. And one of the most apparent questions that someone asked was essentially what I see and notice with everybody. And so the guy says, and I'm going to read what he wrote as a kind of comment / question. As a father and working professional, I feel a tension between participating in our current system and being real. How do you suggest being real and participating in an unhealthy culture? Being real as a direction, and this direction seems to be in direct opposition to our culture. This, I know for myself, the tension I feel a lot. I think we all knowingly or unknowingly feel this tension. We as humanity have a collective bad faith of what we envision us as being as humanity is not matching up with our actions. And this is creating a lot of tension, a lot of our empty media and culture. And so that's why I wanted to be this light in the darkness. So it goes from first the individual, then it's as us, as this little family community that we are, the Infinite Imaginarium, and then it's the broader picture of humanity. So I guess I want to frame the whole thing like this, but then open it up to anybody else and sharing their thoughts.
I'll go ahead, and I will actually, there's a few things I would love to read to you guys, and you inspired me so much by bringing up that topic and how to be the light within the darkness. This book jumped off of the shelf to me. It's actually kind of funny because of the title, but healing the child within. And as a child of a dysfunctional family, I did hear this book before come up in topic, but I always laughed it off until I grabbed it and saw this little child on the cover being cradled by a universe. And I thought, it's interesting because it's comparing fulfilling our real self and who we really are versus growing up in a dysfunctional environment. So you don't have to apply that to your own personal family. You can apply that to the world and the destructive media that we have this, what I call an onslaught of. But I did see something that I really wanted to, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's pretty long. And there's something that says, please hear what I'm not saying. Okay, and I'd like to read you just the beginning of this because this really was moving to me. Please hear what I'm not saying. Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face I wear. I wear a mask, 1,000 masks that I'm afraid to take off, and none of them is me. Pretending is an art that's second nature with me, but don't be fooled. For God's sake, don't be fooled. I give you the impression that I am secure, that all is sunny and unruffled with me within, as well as without. That confidence is my name, and coolness is my game. That's the waters calm, and I'm in command, and that I need no one. But don't believe me. My surface may seem smooth, but my surface is my mask, ever varying and ever concealing. Beneath lies no complacence. Beneath lies confusion and fear and aloneness. But I hide this. I don't want anybody to know this. I panic at the thought of my weakness and fear being exposed. This is why I frantically create a mask to hide behind. This is why I frantically create, again, a mask to hide behind. A nonchalant, sophisticated facade to help me pretend, to shield me from the glance that knows. But such a glance is precisely my salvation. My only hope, and I know it. That is, if it is followed by acceptance, it's followed by love. It is the only thing that can liberate me from myself, from my own self-built prison walls, from the barriers I so painstakingly erect. It is the only thing that will assure me of what I can't assure myself, that I am really worth something. Now this goes on, and the reason why I'm going to stop there is because I want to say to Satori and to everyone in the Imaginarium, this literally is how most people live, without expression, with wearing masks. They are not for themselves even that light or spark in the darkness. I've had to put these masks on my entire life, and I too panic at the thought of weakness and being exposed. But I constantly have to create, and frantically I do, to try to hide behind that facade. Now I have a place to create and to connect with the same rigorousness and almost the same process, but again leading to connectivity. And when it says here, I'm so fearful that that one glance that I'll be seen. And here's the thing, when I was seen and invited to the Imaginarium, at first I was scared. And then it turned into a beautiful thing where I had a chance to turn all the darkness I've experienced in my life, which for me, the light and the darkness was for me being born. It wasn't as if anything had to change from there. I had an uphill battle when you believe you've been born with a certain amount of PTSD in your DNA. But here I've found someone who saw me and was able to be that glance that looked right through my soul and connected to me. And I just say thank you for that, because you heard what I'm not saying. And that's what that was titled. Please hear what I'm not saying. Don't be fooled by me. Don't be fooled by the face I wear. And don't be fooled about my happiness. Pretending is an art form, pretty much, for me. It says it's second nature. Now I can have that be with the Imaginarium. And I can share that with everyone and show people that the darkness is actually, when you go to the complete darkness, you have to remember, wherever there is life, a shadow will be cast. In order to create anything new, you have to go back to the darkness. Just like a seed needs to break to give forth life to grow a plant. It's very similar, the creative process. And I just want to say thank you for the chance to be able to do this with you guys. I really appreciate it.
I think gets to the core of what's going on. I know really in the beginning of Minds, a lot of us were not anonymous, and it's weird that we put on a mask of whatever image or whatever, not putting on your regular face that you did on Facebook, but putting on some kind of mask or persona, that it gave us it's a kind of a quandary. It gave us this ability to be more free than we are when we were on Facebook. That the mask freed us to express ourselves fully, and then it's kind of this weird process of the more you do it, the vulnerability that I know for myself. I always wrote poetry as a way to process the world, and I never really got that much good experience sharing it. Well, first I didn't want to share it because I was scared and I didn't want to show weakness. But there's another thing that came up in that webinar, is that what we kind of perceive as weakness because of our conditioned mind of the culture that we're in, where it's about forcing your will and power, which is more of a mind and strategy game, versus quote unquote the heart, which is more intuitive, and the inner light, and that game is more about expressing your truer self. When you're being vulnerable, it gives you the strength and power. And so I noticed that right away. The more vulnerable I was in writing something or poetry or a specific artwork that I want to share, because even the artwork is a mask that we use to express ourselves fully. And this is something too that I kind of want to touch on in the show as we move on. There's different forms of it, right? Like comedy, this is what makes great comedy really good, because they could talk about the darkness that we have in society as their own nature, and make it in this way that it's funny, that pierces our armor, our mask that we wear around all day, trying not to be vulnerable and trying to strategize as we move along. And we're playing this zero-sum game. But that's why I like that quote, or the saying that I always say is that, but the lover knows that more for you means more for me. And Nikki, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add, it's okay to feel that you can be something different. So like quite often people feel that they have to define themselves in some way. And then when they go through, we're constantly shifting realities non-stop, just through our thought processes. So people often think, well, I define myself as this person, I'm an artist, or it could be I'm a banker, I'm a teacher, this is my name, this is who I am. And then all of a sudden they go through a major shift, or they change their state of consciousness to the point that they're really aware of it. And they suddenly think, my God, but if I change that much, it's going to look really weird and inconsistent to my character, or it might make me look a bit frivolous, or a bit to what I said I was, or I might look like a liar if I suddenly change what I was 10 hours ago. But the reality is you can change yourself. you can recreate yourself or reinvent yourself. Like, I would always say, people have to somehow come to a point where they feel that it's okay to be different. It doesn't matter. You sort of think about what you did yesterday. You kind of go through the motions, think, oh yeah. So you're kind of like remembering something that happened in what we would call the past. That actual process of you remembering, you shifting into a new reality. We're constantly shifting into new realities all the time. So when people think, I was a banker yesterday, but now I'm going to be an artist, now I'm going to do whatever. Everyone, all my friends, all my social group are going to think that I'm a bit naff. But the reality is we're constantly shifting just from our thought processes. So it's okay, acknowledgement that you can be different. Going back to what you were saying about Minds and how it provided this platform for people to come on, speak about things. They could be anonymous, they didn't have to show their faces and everything. I kind of see that as a bit of a training ground. You know, the whole thing about technology being the training ground for elevated state of consciousness that human beings are sort of slowly but surely heading towards. This new state of consciousness where eventually we won't need technology because we'll all be able to connect with the human biocomputer. We won't need, I kind of think it's the same thing in terms of this feeling comfortable to be different, to do something different, not being embarrassed to change yourself or reinvent yourself through fear of what other people might think. Giving us these platforms or places where we can feel safe to change, to do different things or air our views on something. Eventually they'll be able to just come out and say, well, this is what I am, this is what I'm doing, this is what I believe in. And the people that resonate with that, the people that are on the same vibrational wavelength or frequency as you, will just come into your life, and the ones that aren't on that frequency will just fall away. And that's all right as well, because I think it's all about fear really that prevents people from moving forward. There's no kind of right or wrong in any of this. It's just a process of progression.
This kind of goes into, I guess, the first stages of trying first find that spark or that light within. And I just did this video edit of Alan Watts talking about Carl Jung and the shadow and accepting the darkness within yourself and others. And he's talking about a psychiatrist and saying about condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses. That if you're repelled by the sickness and the corruption, then we can't change anything unless we accept it. So the more you try to ignore this bad fate that is first within ourselves, is the more it oppresses us. It's kind of this counterintuitive thing. It's weird the caveat to that is about going to the deepest knowing of yourself. There's limits to the mind, and the mind is a very powerful and beautiful thing. But there's this great saying about it. The mind is a great student, but a horrible master. Meaning that the limits of the mind, as always strategizing, always playing these games and not wanting to show weakness, and the conditioned mind, especially that we're in this culture, we're conditioned that there's these certain templates that we're supposed to play, right? And it's usually pressure by your family first, and then pressure by outside world and media, and that you're supposed to go to your 9-to-5 job, raise your nuclear family. This is the proper way to do it. You have to play the power games at work. Expressing yourself is fine only in regulated amounts. That's something you do once you've done all your homework, and then you can do your imagination. And it's funny because I remember hearing this kind of when I was younger, and all the time I would strategize doing my homework, the less time so I could maximize my imagination more. And what I didn't realize then that I do now when I'm looking back, in my imagining, I was doing more work and learning more than I was checking off boxes, answering questions. Now, the imagination, to have it fully formed, I think, is to integrate that too. You need a foundation of, the more you have a foundation of language, and there's tons of different languages. I just don't mean like English and Spanish or Chinese or whatever, but also mathematics and coding and artwork and symmetry. All of this is languages to help fill this bigger toolkit that we use of the mind to express our inner selves. And if we oppress our nature and say, no, this is something we do out there, it doesn't liberate us, it oppresses us, because then we get into this funk. I know I used to always get into this funk of doing this cycle of going to work, then getting really stressed out. And then my only outlet was that I go out with everybody and we go drink. Then I'll get really tired because I'm hungover, and then repeat that cycle again. And then I was feeling a little numb. And this is where the banging my head against reality comes from, is that I didn't have these creative outlets. I was trying to suppress that creative outlet. I need to strategize. I need to get a house. I need to get a wife and kid, or whatever it is that I feel in this pressure of the conditioned mind and the culture and my family or whatever. And a lot of it was an illusion. This pressure that I was putting on myself was because I didn't really spend time to really look at myself and to see, where is my path with heart? There's so many different paths. And I like something what Don Juan says, is that all paths are folly, but the only one that paths for you is the path of heart. And there's this other saying, is that there's a difference between to being a holy fool, being foolishly holy. A holy fool, meaning that you kind of like use enlightenment as another mask, or to being a holy fool and having this play and fun with it, that when I'm more and more in tune with myself, and this is why I like to use that phrase that I'm a trickster, to say that I'm a social and intellectual chameleon, that I put on different hats and different masks to try to coax the imagination or connection or expression off of people depending on how I feel. And even to myself, I know that really when I'm talking, and a lot of stuff that I say on the show or a lot of stuff that I post is to remind myself, to constantly jolt myself to later, because there's always dark nights of the soul. And I know the same process of creativity leads to the dark night of the soul, is like the hangover from feeling really great and that everything's possible and you're in this creative flow. And then all of a sudden, either you finish it or just out of nowhere, it kind of stops. You're at this great high, and then all of a sudden you're numb and you feel this emptiness. You feel the delusion, the void, the emptiness of everything. You get this really kind of anxiousness and this like, what does everything mean? Everything's meaningless. The real thing, I think, what I heard the best way, and they were referring to psychedelics, and I've learned a lot of different lessons in psychedelics. There was this Tibetan monk, and he was talking to, I think, Timothy Leary and Allen Ginsberg, and he was telling them that if you see something beautiful and heavenly and great, don't cling. If you see hell and horror and pain, don't cling. And the clinging, you're not liberating yourself from this whole dynamic, non-dualistic nature of yourself and reality. And this is something that I'm constantly bringing up, because I'm constantly trying to remind myself about it, to have this fluidness of ourselves, of that we're complicated people and we don't necessarily fit in to these templates that culture has set up for us. And those are, but not to totally reject those templates, but to see that we could use those templates to achieve more of ourselves and more of the things that we want. And that they're just a means to an end and not an end in themselves. The end in itself is first your inner light, but also the inner light that comes from the connecting and collaborating and creating with each other. And that this interaction, this energy that we feel when we express ourselves, and that I felt earlier in the webinar that I feel every time on the show, and when we get to this point that I think we're moving towards right now, is that we're letting our inner selves express ourselves, and then it's a invigorating experience, and this is the core experience, I think, for the Imaginarium, is something that goes beyond any words that we could express. Kevin, did you want to come in and say something?
I'd like to thank you guys for being here and thank the people who are listening today. And as an altruist, the light in the darkness has a very deep and meaningful experience to me, because frequently I stand on the cusp of a very complicated quagmire in existing. I don't really exist for myself. I really don't need very much. I learned as a person of faith early on that true fulfillment lies in giving, and not giving in hopes of receiving something, but in giving in hopes that someone else will find the capacity to give or give more. And that, to me, is the fundamental in existence of life. The road of nature and in the teaching of being and self is nature knows not only reproduce itself. Nature knows not only tend to the self, care for the self. Nature knows only abundance. Nature knows if I'm going to reproduce something, I'm going to make as much as I possibly can, that I will propel myself through all against odds and into my future self simply from the act of making as much of myself as I can and spreading it in whatever manner I can conceive and I can generate within. And so being the light in the darkness under that pretext means that it's a selfless act. There are plenty of opportunities within us to harbor, to hold, to gather, but in doing so, we only limit the seed's potential to grow. We hope that the candle will reflect light far enough out to illuminate the objects that are around us. Because fundamentally, the act of taking and controlling is extractive. And when something is as extractive, it actually acts as the creation of vacuum. It actually pulls things into it and holds them there and doesn't allow them to practically function. I think that gets to be a little bit complicated for people to understand in a social environment where success is viewed as having. Success is viewed as this beautiful image in a mirror, and wholeness is the pride of a well-educated family that is very accomplished at extracting value. Indeed, in a large part, our society has sort of formulated itself to be extractive, first from the earth and then from each other, therefore embellishing and polishing our capacity to be cunning. And what we find out from that is that in having to live in that life, we're always defending an ideal, or defending something, pointing fingers somewhere else at why that might be more wrong or less wrong. There's been some prime examples for us lately in the news that don't even need to be brought up to be understood. You find out that the things that require defending generally are not true. That on a fundamental level, truth doesn't require defending. It just is. To be the light and to act within the space of your environment, within your space of people, within your space of consciousness and your intertwined sharing within Indra's net, means that you are an act of altruism. You are an act of selflessness, because the energy is just passive. It just is, it's always there. And it flows through us in positive and negative depending on the reaction of all the life, of all the creation functioning within itself and within the mindset of the others in which you're surrounded. This false paradigm of the social environment that we sort of have to function in gathering and being whole through aggregate pieces borrowed from others really can leave a person feeling empty and unfulfilled. And so we are forced to make decisions about how to conduct ourselves, what is reasonably accepted behavior based on the things that we idolize really being extractive and really just taking and building imagery of success that doesn't fill our internal conscious self. So we're constantly at odds trying to be the light in the darkness, because none of the media or the formatting that we have been offered supports anything that doesn't require some defense, that doesn't require some act of justification to validate our existence, which makes filling and illuminating each of us being mirrors and dancing the light in the stars of the sky. It's a selfless act. The star is energy that has slowed down to the point that gravitons find each other and pull each other more tightly together, and then as an act of unison burst forth in luminous light and shining and growing, and when they're shining, illuminating other objects, other gaseous clouds and other spacious places, which allows us to see. For we are merely 4% of all the things that are. We're this tiny little fraction of all the spaces, mostly empty space. Our bodies are an assemblage of trillions of living things that want to come together harmoniously, to find a common ground to exist, so that in their being together, they can make expressions of beauty and love, to share and grow, to illuminate. But that came from being light, not from being vacuum, not from being void, and not from being self-serving. I think we have a real glut of personality that ultimately is placed on a pedestal and then given to young people to say, this is what you should strive for. I think few of us could manage to name more than a couple of people who we really admire for their capacity to bring people together, to grow community, to solve problems, and to join minds in unison and in harmony. And I do believe that our Imaginarium is here to capitulate that energy, to form together thoughts and complexities and expressions of art and poetry and thought and philosophy that bring within us a closeness, a safety, a trust, a vulnerability that allows us to exist and comprehend and contemplate each other's place, and to find that within each of us is this altruist that our society has asked to stay hidden in the closet. I hope that us together will be able to coax that person out, release them from the confines behind the door, and bring them into the light, and let them feel the wholeness of being and the kindness that lies in being one with all of us.
One thing, and I remember having a discussion with my friend about this, and I'm going back to that little story about the chickens in the darkness. And I think, and this is, of course, the myth and the metaphor. This is why, in some form of another, it has always been there. That this power of myth. But the story of Adam and Eve, right? Eve gives the apple of knowledge to Adam to eat, and then they get cast out. what that to me says is that's when we split from, we had this dual thing within our nature. We stop being fluid within the natural order. We split things into good and evil. We split ourselves from mind and heart instead of being this integrated whole. Learning that the mind is just a tool, but it's not an end in itself. The end in itself, the dance, what I like to refer to as the dance of eternity. And the thing that I like to say is that, you know, about beauty is beauty. That's all there is to it. If you're interested in yourself, then you're stuck with yourself and you're stuck with your death. But if you get interested in beauty, then you launch onto something mysterious inside your soul that grows and grows like a secret insane thought until you're it. That's the dance of eternity. If you're only interested in yourself, then you're playing this game of splitting yourself off from life, really. And you're playing that game of zero sum. You're playing that game of that you're not recognizing yourself, and we switch that shift off collectively as humans, as humanity. And this is where we started playing the extractive game with nature. We just started taking from them, and what more can we get, instead of having the connected view that we have intuitively with us. And this is where I think a lot of our problems stem from, is this tension of having this bad faith. We know intuitively that we're connected to everybody, but our minds, our conditioned minds, are playing this game that we need to play the zero-sum game, that I need to win, and in order for me to win, that means you lose. That means I get more of the pie, and it's this compulsion. This is why we have people idolize billionaires, and these billionaires that keep on consuming, even when it's as a detriment to their own business, as they crumble the stock market, as they destroy people's houses in the housing bubble. There's tons and tons of examples of this, and yet we still compulsively play this game like if there's going to be some other outcome if we keep on doing this extractive value. And it's so much to the extent that I truly believe that majority of them don't even see it. And this is the part of the condemnation doesn't bring about liberation but oppression, that if you don't become aware of your whole being, including the darker sides of your being, that you're going to be controlled by them. And it's hard because there was one thing that he said, something about the mind. The mind can't recognize its source. And it reminded me of this other quote, this famous thing saying that, I don't know who discovered water, but it wasn't the fish. And that's kind of like us into consciousness, where the mind, we're so mind focused that we're the fish swimming around in the ocean, and we haven't discovered that we're simultaneously both our own individual self, but it's a reflection of the overall dance of eternity, of this consciousness. And when we switch that connectedness, and I think in some form or another, this seed of an idea has kept on propagating, and this is where the stemming of, and it's become so, in my opinion, empty in the sense that people go through the motions, but I know for, saying a prayer before you eat, but in the Native American tradition, they would pray not necessarily to God in the separateness, but pray and thanking the animal for giving up its life so that we could sustain life. And really getting in tune with that connectiveness of that, yes, we're taking the energy from this animal, but it's to sustain the overall energy of the group, and that not that we're taking it as this non-living thing which we view things as. Animals and even more plants are not really living things, not like how we are, that they become a part of us, that they live on in this dance of eternity, that there's this dance, this flow of energy coming together, getting absorbed, and creating sustainability and morphing and dancing to more possibilities and more creativity. And this is the dance that we've been ignoring. This is the dance, and that's that beauty that I'm talking about. Because the main thing in the universe, the Lord and King of the cosmos is nameless, so I give it the name beauty. And these are all metaphors and stories to help us to wake back up. They're the little nuggets of energy that people since the beginning of time have set there for when we're ready to come to these realizations, that they're there. And I do feel that myself, me, the individual Daniel, but also to the idea of Satori D and even the idea of the Imaginarium is in this great long lineage of trying to distill that essence and putting it into these artworks and media, that they're there for. There's another great saying is, when the student is ready, the master will appear. Because that's happened to me. Like what Missy was saying about the book just appeared to her. I have had that on all sorts of different forms. Wherever I was at that moment, a book just kind of glistened in a bookstore, and I read it, or I picked it up and said, oh, I should get this, and I buy it. And maybe I don't even read it right away until later, where there was some passage, something in there that I needed to hear in that moment and in that time to help me. Like, for instance, watching Doctor Strange movie, that one about that. I was like, oh, that's a great one. And you hear from time to time. Sometimes I hear when I take the bus. I like to just kind of like, one, I either probably have like a book or I'm writing something, but every now and then I take time just to hear all the sounds. And sometimes I hear someone say something and I just laugh. I was like, oh, that's crazy, because I think I needed to hear that at that moment in that time. I was ready. When the student is ready, the master will appear. Where creativity and consciousness is always there, always ready to leak out and to express itself. And we just need to be ready, or not even ready, is just to become aware. And this is something too that we talked about, is about everything is awareness. And both simultaneously, that we're awareness, as we're aware that we're conscious beings, but also everything is awareness in the sense that everything is consciousness. So it's two things. It's non-dualistic, that one, and this is the paradox and the really hard thing, because we're so stuck in mind, and mind is about patterns and logic and divvying up the world into ones and zeros, which the world is ones and zeros, but that's the limited. It's not that it's wrong that it's limited. There's a deeper understanding that goes beyond words, and that's why the myths and the artwork is so powerful, because it's one of the best, actually the only way, thing that Allen Ginsberg said one time, is that we all been faced with beauty face to face one time or another in our lives, where we said, aha, that's it, that's why I was born, and this is why I'm here on earth. But none of us have had the guts to say it or to really understand it, except in strange poetry and in strange mathematics. And it's true. Well, I always trip out on the great discoveries of science have happened in the imagination. Einstein, his theory of relativity, he was daydreaming about how it would be to be a light particle moving at the speed of light. And then he came up with his theory of relativity, how space and time are together. And then he did the hard work of proving it through the ones and zeros of math. And that's part of the dance of eternity. And this is all the strange thing that seamless everything that's going on around us. And I think a lot of the times we get this blockness or this fear of being vulnerable, of being naked and shining our light in the darkness. But also too, we view the darkness, because it's the problem too I see is with our language. Our language is limited, that it's always the map, not the menu. So we get confused as we think things too literally. And we get hung up on words that darkness means something negative, and negative is bad, and so I don't accept it, and I don't want to face it, I don't want to deal with it. But in this more non-dualistic, intuitive way of looking at things, it helps to be able to accept all this. I think the real evil in the world is that we haven't fully integrated and accept our true nature. And so it's been oppressing us. And I kind of want to express this because of what's going on in the climate of our world, is that if we look at things through this lens, the real evil that's happening in this world is because throughout our history as human beings, you know, the road to hell is paved with the greatest intentions, that they've been trying to stomp out evil. Even Hitler thought he was bringing on a new age of humanity, and that's why he was doing what he's doing, because he wanted to stomp out what he saw as the darkness, the subhumans. And the same thing with slavery, same thing going all the way back in our times of us against you, that we're good and you're bad, and we have to do this bad thing. And it's funny because we have these stories throughout our all time that teaches us a different lesson that seems counterintuitive to our conditioned mind, but it resonates, I think, harder, is the lesson of Jesus saying how you break the cycle of hate and violence is through love. Turn the other cheek. And there has been small gleaming blimps of light through our humanity of people doing this, right? Whether it be Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and these different stories that we have throughout time. Because also too, that is an archetype in ourselves that is deeply embedded within the structure of humanity, but also too, I think, even in the structure of consciousness.
Hey, you just brought up something I wanted to speak on that I'm so glad you did. You brought up, well, a lot of things. Interestingly enough, when you speak of turning the other cheek and consciousness and time and love, the light and the darkness, I'm going to tell you, my represented tarot card would be the Hermit. Now, I'm not sure if you know about the archetypes and how the tarot cards are representative of them. And you spoke of very much the Jungian, archetypes that are reflected constantly throughout our culture, throughout the ages. We see it reflected, whether it's the trickster, the hero. You mentioned you feel like the trickster, right? The hero, the mother or midwife. Does that sound familiar? The innocent child. In a way, what's interesting is the Hermit card itself is depicted in one deck. He's holding a well-oiled lamp and he goes off on his own. The Hermit has the urge of self-reflection and introspection. Any wrong decisions he made or anything he made appropriate. But not only is it about entering a path to inner self-awareness and realization, his light that he casts is for others because he's been through it. But he does need to go away to return back to the community. And in a way, he represents that creative process of the light and the darkness. You have to go away in order to come back. And in another deck, he's represented as time, the Hermit. Instead of in his hand, having the well-oiled lamplight, the wick representing his wisdom of inner knowledge always burning, keeping it well lit. In another deck, an even older deck, he's represented in the Visconti Sforza deck as time, and he's holding an hourglass. I wanted to read you the interpretation, and I realized right next to it is a quote by Carl Jung about the metamorphosis of the psyche, which is very much about the Hermit, and it explains what I'm trying to say about the archetypes and the inner alchemy of your imagination and the Imaginarium, and how this pertains to saving your own uncovering your own hidden motivations. And one of the quotes here is, "It's only by discovering alchemy have I clearly understood that the unconscious is a process, and that ego's rapport with the unconscious and his contents initiate an evolution, more precisely a real metamorphosis of the psyche." Other than the Hermit card being an archetype of a wise one, wise old one, he is also the archetype of the inner alchemy and he's holding the hourglass of time. Now, if you were to go based on the symbolism of going away, turning the other cheek, could be representative of giving something time as well. Going instead, looking within, which is what I call within when without. Instead of looking outwardly to transform yourself. And there's something that I just wanted to read on that about the awakened man. The awakened man no longer commits crimes against himself, psychosomatic illnesses, or a sense of shame. Here's something that I need to read to you because this happened to me. Suppose a decent and sensible girl, young girl, is hypnotized by an evil magician and told that she is a fool. So she acts like one. But the next day, she snaps this out of the spell and wonders, should I feel ashamed? Do I feel ashamed? No, this is an indication that I would still be falsely identifying with that fool that I'm no longer. And I see if that's the foolish behavior that sprang from the false sense of identity. Instead of condemning the past behaviors, I would understand them. And that's quite another thing. Now, the freedom of the cosmic sense is supreme. It absolves a man from his former self and makes future slavery impossible. If we're talking about freedom of the mind and alchemy of the imagination, again, the freedom of the cosmic sense is supreme. It absolves a man from former self and makes future slavery impossible. We're talking about liberating your mind and consciousness. And on that, a man cannot see, and I think this is an Alan Watts quote, a man cannot see anything he's unwilling to see. I may be wrong, but I'm going to read it anyway. Is one of my favorites. I keep it near me all the time because I have this issue myself until I was ready to see. And you were speaking about the book that twinkles and appears to you in the bookstore. And on that, no one can see anything they're unwilling to see. A man unwilling cannot see anything he's unwilling to see. He's unwilling because he fears that the loss of his false and fixed viewpoints means loss of himself. And we see that a lot, right? And people identifying with these loss of their old nature as a loss of self. But it actually really leads to your true self. You have to plunge into the darkness. You have to, that fear that there's nothing beyond is actually already giving up. Everyone has to take the plunge for themselves, as I was saying to someone earlier about whether or not they believe in the void being helpful to create anything. You know, if they have no capacity to understand that as an opportunity, it's more just about a level of awareness. And I think that the Imaginarium is creating that ripple of awareness. It's creating it on a large scale, and soon it's going to ripple and ripple and ripple.
There's actually, that reminds me of this, and I forgot exactly how the quote goes by Terence McKenna, but he says that nature encourages that you have to take that jump into the abyss to find out that underneath you landed in a bed of roses. Taking that leap into the void. And I think this is where I think we have always been doing this as consciousness, seeing consciousness itself. And this is, we all have, either whether we fully realize it or not, these weird secret feelings that latch onto us, that grows and grows until we're it.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that people can kind of start with in terms of wanting to create their own reality is understanding the importance of words, the vibration of words. And there's two things that you can look upon as being quite important, and things that we may say that are important in this sort of the grand scheme of creation, and words in terms of vibration. I am are the most important. Those that statement, I am, is so key to creation. And in terms of metaphors, you know, there's the old in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. So if you want to look upon that as a metaphor, you know, we're all one consciousness having a human experience. So, you know, my opinion or view of how things work is that we are all God. I don't mean it in a egotistical sense, but we're one consciousness having a human experience. So we're all kind of like separated off, you know, in this third dimensional realm of polarity and duality. So, you know, thoughts become things. Our thoughts are one aspect, and then what we say, you know, what we speak, which then carries a vibration, is what brings things into creation. So if we can be more mindful about what we do and what we say, rather than just kind of improvising. Well, actually, that's wrong in a sense, because you can improvise, but you can be conscious and aware when you're doing it. So if you have an awareness when you're thinking or saying things, that's key to creation. And in terms of our, you know, our whole show tonight, you know, light from the darkness, we have to understand that as an individual, what we do as an individual is then connective with everything else that we perceive to be external to us, you know, other separate beings to the one consciousness. So, you know, what we think and then what we say must be congruent, must be harmonious. It doesn't matter if we say we're going to do something, and then maybe it takes us a little bit longer than what we originally envisaged it would take us. You know, what I'm saying is, don't beat yourself up about that. Don't think, oh God, you know, I said I was going to do such and such by a certain time, but I wasn't able to do it. Whatever, it doesn't matter. You know, the key thing is that we're congruent with our thoughts and what we say and what we do. And if all of those things are harmonious, we bring those things into creation on a very awake, aware, conscious level. And that's the key. And, you know, if we understand that we're all connected, so what we think and what we do then is reflective of our reality. You know, don't think, oh, if I do this, then it's going to hurt somebody else, or it's going to, or maybe I shouldn't do that. You know, it's kind of that thing of overthinking stuff, which I'm very guilty of myself. I overthink things a lot sometimes. But if we can be harmonious in our thoughts and our actions, we bring those things into creation. You know, that's the true meaning of the law of attraction, all these things, you know, within the New Age arenas that we hear about a lot, and, you know, how best to do that. In a sense, it's quite simple, although people kind of think, you know, how can I possibly create something so wonderful that I want for myself? They might think, I couldn't possibly do that because it would be too selfish. But in actual fact, it's simple in the sense that we just think, we do, so we act. And everything we say is harmonious with what we think and what we do and what we act. So that is the key to creation. And that's why those words, I am, and what follows it, are the keys to creation. And then that's when the magic of synchronicity comes into play. And Carl Jung refers to it as meaningful coincidences. But meaningful coincidences are synchronicity. So when we start seeing that synchronicity, those coincidences and things connecting, happening at a more of a high speed pace, we know we're on the right track, to creation. Or, being the change that we want to see, and all the rest of it, all these little terms and things that go around, usually in the forms of memes now on the internet. But
Or are you reading my mind, Nikki? or your ability to say almost word for word, similarly what I was gonna say. I just love hearing you say it first. Oh yeah, it's so fun. I love hearing you say it first.
Yeah, definitely. Kevin, your final thoughts, if you could wrap them up, and we could end.
I would just encourage people to understand that to elevate, to light, to free the thought and the mind, to understand that as humans, our pockets are full of stones that we've picked up along the road that sort of keep us weighed to the ground, that keep us cemented in things that we're not part of where we're going. And it's the holdback that is causing the frustration in the human condition right now. The society and the human being has been actively ready to evolve for thousands of years, and yet through empire and various means, we've continued this Wideco, this cannibalistic, self-destructive method upon each other. Find the people that you are most comfortable with, and to be deeply authentic, and to suffer out loud, to release the things within you verbally that are holding your soul in the darkness, in the places. But don't do them in such a way as to reiterate them or to relive them. Do this in such a way as to release them freely into the world, to see them as something that existed in a time that you were, and not in the time that you are. Because the place that you are in now is always moving forward and always giving you the chance to come closer to the true, authentic self that you are. But you have to let go of the things that you're suppressing, of the stones that you're carrying in your pocket, if you want to achieve the things that you want within yourself and within your being. So I'll just close by reading a quick poem by Mary Menduck, No Voice Talking. What sound, with no voice talking, rattle of silence, hymn of the universe, or one still body moving through a subtle field, feeling the lightness, existence, emptiness, without hunger, connected, not tied, part of, remaining individual. A Venn diagram, two circles passing each other, a spacious, mysterious place, too broad for words, as in the quiet that flows and follows making love. Thank you.
That's also, I guess, one last thing that I want to express is something when Missy said about the alchemy. And I view a lot of the times this is the function of art, is that alchemy of the turning the darkness into the light. And this is the struggle for myself, and this is why it's important to have this kind of community of support, so you could be that vulnerable and naked and really dig in hard at times. But this is the struggle that I have with myself, and I think hopefully the function of the Imaginarium is the struggle for sustainability of that connection, collaborating and creating. And Missy is going to end it with reading something. Missy.
Thanks, guys. I really like what you said, Kevin, as well, and the suggestions on reaching that place. And that's exactly what I wanted to say. Firstly, I think it was Marcus Aurelius that said a quote, "Those who do not observe the movements of their own minds must of necessity be unhappy." Self-awakening must be the first and foremost business in anyone's life. Otherwise, he falls into the pit, one pit after another, without knowing why. To awaken, we must first suspect that we are asleep and there is another form of consciousness. That's where shock and suffering aid us. They force us to realize that nothing is really right in spite of all of our claims and pretenses, and nudges us out of our psychic slumber and hopefully into the Imaginarium. Now, that was read from Mystic Path, The Mystic Path to Cosmic Power by Vernon Howard. And right beside it is something funny that reminds me of Nikki and what we say a lot about children, I believe. I think it's Yogananda. It's taken from a Yogananda book. It actually says, I want to enjoy myself, but how do you do that? There is no how in enjoying yourself. Children do not think about how. They have this spontaneity. They just go and do it. And they go have fun. So anyone that's struggling to find this light in the darkness, or struggling to reach that darkness, to find that light within, reach out to other people. There are ways to find this if you can't find it yourself, because it would be a shame if we just settled for a mind, an observing one without any movement, just stagnancy. So thanks, guys.